The jungle doesn't forget. 48 years after the last helicopter lifted off the roof of the American embassy in Saigon, men still wake screaming in suburban bedrooms, clawing at sheets that feel like jungle vines, drowning in sweat that smells like monsoon rain. The Vietnam War didn't end in 1975. It never ended. It followed them home, in the silence between words at family dinners, in the flinch at a car backfiring on a quiet street, in the way a man in his 70s still can't walk past tall grass without scanning for tripwires that haven't existed for half a century. This is the story of the war that haunted a nation, not the story of battles won or lost, but of souls fractured, of a country divided against itself, of young men sent to fight a war their country couldn't explain and wouldn't support, of veterans who came home to a nation that wanted to forget them. It begins not in the jungles of Southeast Asia, but in small towns across America. January 1965. Michael O'Brien is 19 years old, working the morning shift at his father's garage in Scranton, Pennsylvania. His hands are black with engine grease when the letter arrives. Department of the Army. Greetings. He's been drafted. Across America, the same envelope lands on doorsteps from Georgia to Oregon, from Texas to Michigan. The Selective Service System is feeding the war machine, and it hungers constantly. 50,000 young men every month, most of them poor, most of them without the college deferments that keep wealthier boys safe behind university walls. Michael's mother cries into her apron in the kitchen. His father says nothing, just stares at the letter, remembering his own war, Normandy, the Bulge, enemies he could see and understand. But this war in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map? What are we even fighting for? Michael asks. His father has no answer. Nobody does. The official explanation changes depending on who's speaking. Stopping communism, defending democracy, preventing the domino effect that will topple all of Southeast Asia into Soviet hands. But to the boys boarding buses for basic training, these abstractions mean nothing. They're going because their country called. They're going because refusing means prison. They're going because they're 19 and immortal and still believe that wars have clear sides, noble purposes, endings that make sense. Fort Benning, Georgia, March 1965. The transformation is brutal and efficient. Hair shorn to stubble. Civilian identity stripped away. They're taught to kill with rifle, bayonet, grenade. They're taught that the enemy is everywhere and looks like everyone. They're taught that hesitation means death. You will not think, the drill instructor screams into their faces. You will not question. You will follow orders and you will survive. But he doesn't tell them the truth, that survival isn't about coming home with your body intact, that the real casualties won't show up in the official count, that you can lose your humanity in a jungle firefight and never find it again. By May, Michael O'Brien is on a transport plane crossing the Pacific. Below him, 12,000 miles of ocean separate him from everything he's ever known. Ahead of him waits a war that has already been grinding through American lives for over a decade, though most Americans have barely noticed. The French lost it first, Dien Bien Phu, 1954, a humiliating defeat that ended their colonial dreams. Then America, still drunk on World War II victory, still believing in its invincibility, stepped into the vacuum. First came advisors, then came combat troops, then came 500,000 men trapped in a war that couldn't be won by conventional means against an enemy who refused to fight conventionally. The plane descends through monsoon clouds, and the jungle rises to swallow them whole. Tan Son Nhut Air Base, Saigon. The heat hits like a physical blow. 105 degrees. Humidity so thick you could drown in it. The air smells of jet fuel, rotting vegetation, burning trash, and something else, something organic and wrong that Michael will later recognize as death. "Welcome to the Nam," a sergeant with hollow eyes tells them. "You got 365 days. Keep your head down, trust nobody who ain't American, and maybe you go home in one piece." Maybe. The word hangs in the suffocating air. They're assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and sent north to the Central Highlands, where the Viet Cong control the night and the jungle itself seems to be the enemy. Within a week, Michael learns that everything they taught him at Fort Benning is useless. The enemy doesn't wear uniforms. The farmer planting rice in the paddies by day is the sniper who kills your buddy at night. The child offering to shine your boots is a scout for the VC. The village elder smiling and bowing is the one who reports your position to the underground. You can't tell friend from enemy because they all look the same. This fact, this fundamental, maddening impossibility will corrode American souls like acid. November 1965, the Eardrung Valley. The first major battle between American and North Vietnamese forces erupts in the jungle highlands. 400 Americans against 2,000 NVA regulars. The fighting is close, brutal, personal. Men die with their hands on each other's throats. Lieutenant Harold Moore's cavalry troops hold landing zone X-ray for 3 days of hell. Artillery shells turn the jungle into a moonscape. Napalm turns men into torches. The wounded scream for medics who can't reach them through the firestorm. Michael O'Brien, crouched in a foxhole, fires his M16 at shapes moving through the elephant grass until the barrel glows red hot. He doesn't know if he's killing anyone. He just knows he has to keep firing or die. When the shooting finally stops, 79 Americans are dead, 121 wounded. The Army calls it a victory because the body count is higher on the other side. 305 NVA dead, they claim. But body counts are a lie, a metric designed to quantify the unquantifiable, to give politicians something to report, to convince America they're winning a war that can't be won by killing. Because the enemy doesn't care about body counts. For every NVA soldier killed, 10 more filter down the Ho Chi Minh Trail from the north. They've been fighting for 30 years, first the Japanese, then the French, now the Americans. They'll fight for 30 more if they have to. They're fighting for their country. What are we fighting for? Michael asks himself this question every night as he tries to sleep in mud that never dries, listening to the jungle breathe around him, knowing that death could come from any direction at any moment. He still doesn't have an answer. Back home, America is splitting in two. College campuses erupt in protest. Students burn draft cards in front of television cameras. "Hell no, we won't go" becomes the anthem of a generation refusing to fight in what they call an immoral war. In October 1967, 100,000 protesters march on the Pentagon. Norman Morrison, a Quaker pacifist, sets himself on fire outside the Pentagon office of Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, the architect of escalation. He burns to death holding his infant daughter, though he passes her to safety before the flames consume him. His final act is a scream the nation refuses to hear. The country fractures along lines that will never fully heal. Hawks versus doves, greatest generation versus baby boomers, those who served versus those who resisted. Families splinter at dinner tables. Friendships end over arguments about duty and conscience. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, Michael O'Brien and 500,000 other Americans are trapped in the middle. They watch the protests on Armed Forces television and feel betrayed. They're dying in rice paddies while college kids wave Viet Cong flags and call them baby killers. They're following orders while America decides it was all a mistake. But they can't leave. They can't refuse. They have 365 days to survive, and then maybe they go home, if home still exists. January 31, 1968, the Tet Offensive. While Americans celebrate the Lunar Year with a ceasefire, 70,000 Viet Cong and NVA troops launch simultaneous attacks across South Vietnam. They strike 100 cities and towns in a coordinated assault that shatters every assumption about American control. Saigon itself becomes a battlefield. VC commandos breach the U.S. Embassy walls. Fighting rages street to street in Hue, the ancient imperial capital. The city burns for 26 days. Michael O'Brien's unit fights house to house through the rubble, clearing rooms where civilians huddle in corners, where the line between combatant and innocent has dissolved entirely. An old woman raises her hands in surrender. Is she VC or is she terrified? Shoot or don't shoot? Hesitate and die or fire and become a murderer? These are the choices the jungle forces on you. These are the choices that haunt you forever. The Tet Offensive is a military defeat for the communists. They lose 10,000 men and fail to hold any of their objectives. But it's a strategic victory that breaks the American will. Because Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, returns from Vietnam and tells the truth on national television. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic yet unsatisfactory conclusion. If Cronkite says the war is lost, then the war is lost. President Lyndon Johnson watches the broadcast and knows his presidency is over. If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America. He announces he won't seek re-election. But the war doesn't end. It grinds on for 5 more years. 5 more years of Michael O'Brien's learning to kill, learning to hate, learning that everything they believed about honor and duty and noble sacrifice is a lie sold to them by men who will never carry a rifle through elephant grass. The jungle changes you in ways that can't be undone. You learn to sleep with one eye open, with your rifle in your arms like a lover. You learn to recognize the click of an AK-47 safety being released from 100 yards away. You learn that the smell of blood attracts flies within seconds, and that a human body makes a particular sound when torn apart by shrapnel. You learn to stop feeling, because feeling means going insane. Specialist Robert Chambers, a medic with the 101st Airborne, describes it in a letter home that his mother can't finish reading. We found a village yesterday. Women, children, old men, all dead. We don't know who killed them, us or them. Does it matter? I tried to save a little girl with half her face missing. She died in my hands. I didn't cry. I can't cry anymore. I think something inside me died with her. This is what the war does. It kills you without killing you. The atrocities pile up like bodies. My Lai, March 1968. American soldiers massacre 500 Vietnamese civilians, including infants. Lieutenant Calley orders his men to gun down unarmed people huddled in a ditch. They obey. Some of them will never forgive themselves. Some of them will insist they were following orders. Some of them will deny it happened at all. The photographs reach America a year later, and the nation recoils in horror. This isn't the greatest generation fighting the good war. This is something else, something dark and shameful that America doesn't recognize in itself. But the soldiers who were there understand. They understand how easy it is to become a monster when the enemy is everywhere and nowhere. When you can't tell a farmer from a fighter. When your best friend dies from a booby trap set by a child. When the jungle drives you mad with fear and rage and the absolute certainty that you will die in this place for reasons nobody can articulate. The real enemy isn't the Viet Cong. It's the war itself. Michael O'Brien survives his 365 days. He boards a Freedom Bird at Tan Son Nhut in December 1966, along with a plane load of other men who's aged a lifetime and a year. They don't talk during the flight. They just stare out the windows, watching Vietnam recede behind them, wondering if they're really leaving, or if part of them will be trapped in that jungle forever. The plane lands in California, Oakland Army Terminal, the gateway home. There are no parades, no celebrations, no crowds welcoming them as heroes. Instead, they're hustled through processing as quickly as possible, given discharge papers and bus tickets, and told to change out of their uniforms before going into the city. For your own safety, an officer explains. Michael doesn't understand until he sees the protesters outside the gate. The spitting, the screaming, baby killer, murderer. The same Americans who sent him to war now hate him for going. He catches a Greyhound to Pennsylvania in civilian clothes, sitting alone in the back, trying to become invisible. His father picks him up at the station in Scranton. They drive home in silence. What is there to say? How do you explain what the jungle did to you? How do you describe the weight of killing another human being? How do you articulate the guilt of surviving when so many didn't? How do you tell your mother that her son died in Vietnam even though his body came home? You don't. You swallow it. You bury it. You pretend you're fine even as you're drowning in memories that won't stay buried. Michael gets his old job back at the garage. He marries his high school sweetheart. He buys a house on a quiet street with a yard and a fence. He does everything right, everything normal, everything American. But at night, the jungle comes back. The nightmares are the same for thousands of veterans scattered across America. You're back in the jungle. Your rifle jams. The enemy is everywhere. Your friends are dying and you can't save them. You wake up screaming, tangled in sheets soaked with sweat. Your wife terrified beside you, asking, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?" Everything. Everything is wrong.
But the doctors don't have a name for it yet. In 1970, they call it adjustment disorder, or combat fatigue, or nervous exhaustion. They prescribe pills and tell you to forget about it. Move on. Man up. You're home now. You're safe. But you're not safe, because the war is still inside you. Agent Orange, the herbicide sprayed across millions of acres to defoliate the jungle, is still inside you, poisoning your cells, guaranteeing that your children will be born with defects you can't explain. The psychological trauma is still inside you, rewiring your brain's threat responses, making every loud noise a mortar round, every stranger a potential enemy. It will be 1980 before the American Psychiatric Association officially recognizes post-traumatic stress disorder. By then, 58,000 Americans are dead in Vietnam, and countless more are dying slowly at home. Suicide, addiction, homelessness, broken families, rage that explodes without warning, depression so deep you can't imagine climbing out of. The VA hospitals are overwhelmed with men who can't reintegrate, can't hold jobs, can't stop reliving what they've seen and done. The government that sent them to war abandons them when they come home. For decades, Vietnam veterans will be invisible, too controversial to honor, too painful to acknowledge, caught between a nation that wanted to forget the war and a generation that blamed them for fighting it. The war finally ends on April 30th, 1975. North Vietnamese tanks crash through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon. Americans evacuate from the embassy roof in a desperate helicopter airlift, leaving behind a country they'd spent 20 years and 58,000 lives trying to save. South Vietnam falls within hours. America watches on television as embassy staff burn classified documents and push helicopters off aircraft carriers to make room for more evacuees. The images are searing, humiliating, undeniable. America has lost a war. For the first time in its history, America has lost. The soldiers who fought it are left to carry that loss alone. Michael O'Brien watches the fall of Saigon on the evening news and feels something break inside his chest. It was all for nothing. Every patrol, every firefight, every friend who died screaming in the mud, for nothing. That night, he goes into the garage and sits in the dark with a bottle of whiskey and his old service pistol. His wife finds him there at dawn, the pistol untouched, the bottle empty, his face wet with tears he didn't know he could still cry. "I can't get it out of my head," he tells her. "I can't make it stop." She holds him while he shakes, and the jungle keeps growing in his mind. The decades pass, and America slowly, reluctantly, begins to acknowledge what it did to its veterans. In 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is dedicated in Washington, D.C. A black granite wall inscribed with 58,000 names. No speeches, no judgments, just names. Veterans come from across the country to touch the wall, to find friends who never came home, to leave letters and medals and photographs and tears. They come to finally be seen. Michael O'Brien stands before the wall in 1983, searching the polished stone for a name. PFC James Rodriguez, his best friend, killed by a booby trap outside Chulai in August 1966. He traces the letters with shaking fingers. I'm sorry I made it, and you didn't." Around him, other veterans are having the same quiet conversations with the dead, asking for forgiveness, asking for peace, asking for the memories to stop. The wall doesn't answer, but it witnesses. For the first time since they came home, someone is witnessing their pain. Michael O'Brien is 74 years old now. He still lives in Scranton, in the same house he bought in 1967. His wife died 3 years ago. His children are grown with children of their own. He spends his mornings at the VA hospital, attending group therapy sessions with other Vietnam veterans who are finally learning to talk about what they've carried for half a century. They talk about the guilt, the shame, the moral injuries that never heal. They talk about the villagers they couldn't save and the ones they maybe shouldn't have killed. They talk about the friends who died and the friends who came home and died anyway, one slow suicide at a time. They talk about how the war never ended, not for them. On quiet afternoons, Michael sits on his porch and watches the neighborhood children play. He thinks about the children in Vietnam, the ones he saw dead in ditches, the ones orphaned by American bombs, the ones who threw grenades at American patrols because that's what war turns children into. He thinks about the 19-year-old kid from Scranton who climbed on that bus to Fort Benning, still believing in heroes and villains and wars that made sense. That kid never came home. Something else came home wearing his face, carrying his memories, trying desperately to pretend it was human. The war took his youth, his innocence, his faith in authority, his certainty that America was always right, his ability to sleep without dreaming of fire, his marriage. Eventually the strain was too much and she left, though he didn't blame her. His relationship with his son, who grew up afraid of his father's unpredictable rages. His health, the Agent Orange is eating him from the inside, cancer blooming in organs that should never have been poisoned. The war took everything except his life, and sometimes he thinks that's the cruelest theft of all. Across America, 2 million Vietnam veterans are still fighting the war that officially ended in 1975. They're fighting it in VA waiting rooms, in homeless shelters, in prison cells, in suburban bedrooms where nightmares bloom like jungle flowers every night, in therapy groups where old men finally cry, in medicine cabinets filled with pills that can't quite kill the memories. Some of them have found peace. Some have learned to live with the ghosts. Some have turned their pain into purpose, dedicating their lives to helping younger veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan with their own invisible wounds. But for too many, the war is still happening, still real, still lethal. The Vietnam War killed 58,220 Americans between 1955 and 1975. It has killed thousands more in the decades since, by suicide, by overdose, by diseases caused by chemical exposure, by hearts that simply gave out under the weight of trauma that never ended. These deaths don't appear in the official casualty figures, but they should, because the war that America wanted to forget never forgot them. There's a question that haunts every veteran of every war. What did we die for? For the men who stormed Omaha Beach, the answer was clear. Fascism had to be stopped. Evil had to be defeated. The cause was just. For the men who slogged through Vietnamese jungles, there is no clear answer. The dominoes didn't fall. Southeast Asia didn't turn communist except for the countries America bombed. Vietnam today is a thriving nation with McDonald's and Starbucks and millions of tourists visiting every year. The nightmare we were fighting to prevent never materialized. So what was it for? What were 58,000 American lives worth? What were 3 million Vietnamese lives worth? What were 20 years of national division and cultural trauma worth? The veterans asked this question in the darkness, and the darkness has no answer. Some have made their peace with it. The war was wrong, but their service wasn't. They did what their country asked. They showed courage under impossible circumstances. They saved each other when no one else would. That has to mean something. Others can't forgive, not their government, not their country, not themselves. And some simply stopped asking, because the question is too painful and the answer too hollow. Michael O'Brien will die soon. The cancer is winning. The Agent Orange has done his work. His doctor gives him months, maybe a year. He's not afraid of death. He's been living with death since 1965. What frightens him is that the jungle will finally let him go. Because as much as it tortures him, it's also the most real thing he's ever experienced. The intensity, the clarity, the brotherhood, the certainty that what happened in the next 30 seconds determined whether you lived or died. Civilian life has never felt as vivid. He spent 50 years in a kind of twilight, neither fully present nor fully absent, haunted by a war that won't release him. On his last visit to the wall, he brings a letter he's written to James Rodriguez, his friend who died in 1966. He folds it carefully and leaves it at the base of the memorial, weighted down with a small stone from the garage where they used to work together. The letter says, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry the war killed you. I'm sorry it killed me too, just slower. I'm sorry for everything we did and everything we couldn't do. I'm sorry America forgot us, but I never forgot you. I carried you home every single day."
He touches the name one last time, and he walks away, an old man, moving slowly, carrying a jungle that refuses to let him go. The Vietnam War was America's longest war until Afghanistan. It divided the nation like no conflict since the Civil War. It shattered faith in government institutions that has never fully recovered. It changed how America fights wars. No more drafts, no more sustained ground operations without clear public support, no more wars of attrition measured in body counts. But its deepest legacy is written on the souls of the men who fought it. The Vietnam veteran became an archetype in American culture. Damaged, dangerous, unpredictable. Movies portrayed them as ticking bombs or broken victims. Society didn't know how to honor them because it couldn't decide if the war they fought was worth honoring. So they were forgotten, abandoned, left to fight the war's aftermath alone. It took a generation for America to realize what it had done to its veterans. By then, too many were already gone. The jungle doesn't forget. Neither should we. 58,220 names are carved into the black granite wall in Washington. Each name represents a life unlived, a family destroyed, dreams that died in rice paddies and jungles and places whose names most Americans couldn't pronounce. But those 58,000 are only part of the story. For every name on the wall, there are dozens who came home but never really left Vietnam, who struggled and suffered and survived, carrying wounds no one could see. They deserved better. They deserved a nation that understood what it had asked them to do. They deserved recognition, not for winning or losing, but for enduring. They deserved peace. Some found it, many didn't. And the war haunts America still, in the distrust of government, in the fear of foreign entanglements, in the knowledge that sending young men to fight in distant jungles for unclear purposes can destroy a generation. We learned that lesson in blood. We carved it into a black wall, and we must never forget it. If this story moved you, if it made you remember the names time tried to erase, if it reminded you that wars don't end when the shooting stops. Honor their memory. Share their stories. Ensure that the men who carried the jungle home are never forgotten again. They didn't die for nothing if we remember why they died. They didn't suffer in vain if we learn from their suffering. The war that haunted America must haunt our memory too, not as shame, but as witness, not as judgment, but as truth. They were 19 years old, and we sent them to hell. The least we can do is remember.